The bustling cafe on Elm Street held dozens of patrons that rainy Tuesday afternoon, but only one would leave with her life irrevocably changed. In exactly 11 minutes, Eliza Morgan would hear two words that would transform her from an ordinary bookworm into someone at the center of an international conspiracy. Words that would test everything she believed about courage, identity, and the extraordinary potential hiding within the most unassuming souls. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Rain tapped insistently against the windows of Reverie Café, creating a soothing background rhythm that blended with the gentle hum of conversation and the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. Customers huddled over steaming mugs, their faces illuminated by laptop screens or buried in newspapers. The aroma of freshly ground coffee beans mingled with the scent of cinnamon from the day's special pastries, creating that distinctive coffeehouse perfume that felt like a warm embrace on such a dreary day. In the far corner, partially hidden by a large potted fern, Eliza Morgan sat alone at a small round table, completely absorbed in her dog-eared paperback. Her oversized cardigan enveloped her slight frame, and occasionally she would absently tuck a strand of her chestnut hair behind her ear, never once lifting her gaze from the page. To the casual observer, she was just another unremarkable patron, perhaps a graduate student or a young professional taking advantage of her lunch break to escape into fiction. The baristas barely noticed her, even though she'd been a regular for nearly 2 years. She always ordered the same thing, a medium Earl Grey tea with a splash of milk, and always chose that same corner table when it was available. She tipped modestly, but consistently, and never made small talk beyond polite pleasantries. In a city of 8 million people, Eliza had perfected the art of blending into the background, of being utterly forgettable. What no one at Reverie knew was that Eliza had once been someone else entirely. 5 years earlier, she had been Elizabeth Mercer, a promising linguistics specialist with the State Department, whose natural gift for patterns and unprecedented aptitude for obscure dialects had caught the attention of certain government agencies. Her professors at Georgetown had called her ability, quote, once in a generation, but Eliza had never wanted to be exceptional. She had simply wanted to use her talent to help people communicate across cultural divides. But that was before Vienna. Before the diplomatic mission that went catastrophically wrong. Before she'd been made the scapegoat for an intelligence failure that cost lives. Before she'd retreated into obscurity, changing her name and disappearing into the anonymity of New York City, where she now translated technical manuals for a modest living work that barely utilized a fraction of her capabilities. At a nearby table, 3 young tech executives in expensive casual wear discussed startup valuations loudly enough for everyone to hear, periodically punctuating their conversation with forced laughter. 2 tables over, a young couple leaned toward each other, speaking in hushed tones, their fingers intertwined atop the marble tabletop. The cafe staff moved efficiently behind the counter, a well-choreographed dance of taking orders, making drinks, and calling out names. Eliza turned a page, completely immersed in her novel, a historical thriller set during the Cold War that most certainly contained inaccuracies about intelligence operations that would have made her former colleagues cringe. But that life was behind her now. These days, she found comfort in the predictable rhythms of ordinary existence. Wake up, work, read, sleep, repeat. No high-stakes decisions, no lives hanging in the balance, just blessed, anonymous monotony. The bell above the door chimed as a man in a charcoal gray overcoat entered, bringing with him a gust of cool air and the faint smell of rain. He stamped his feet gently on the welcome mat and surveyed the cafe with the measured gaze of someone accustomed to assessing his surroundings. Mid-50s, Eliza guessed, though she didn't look up long enough to note more details. Just another customer seeking refuge from the downpour. The man ordered something at the counter, his voice too low for Eliza to catch, and then took a seat at table 12, directly in her line of sight, but 2 tables away. He removed his coat to reveal a neatly pressed suit that seemed somehow out of place among the cafe's usual clientele of casual professionals and university students. He placed his phone face up on the table and occasionally glanced at it, though it never rang or lit up with notifications. There was something vaguely familiar about him that tugged at the edges of Eliza's awareness, but she deliberately pushed the thought away. Hypervigilance had been part of her old life, the constant assessment of threats and opportunities. Now, she reminded herself, Strangers were just strangers, not assets or adversaries or people of interest. Just humans going about their day, deserving of privacy and disinterest. 40 minutes passed this way, with Eliza deeply engrossed in her novel and the man at table 12 sipping his coffee while occasionally consulting his watch. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the windows with growing insistence. The cafe had begun to empty as the lunch rush subsided, leaving scattered patrons tapping on laptops or engaged in hushed conversations. It was then that it happened, the moment that would cleave Eliza's carefully constructed life in two, creating a distinct before and after. The man at table 12 answered his phone, which had finally rung. His voice, previously inaudible, now carried clearly across the half-empty cafe. "Yes, I understand," he said, his tone clipped and professional. "The Phoenix Protocol is active. I'll proceed as instructed." Eliza's hand froze mid-page turn. Those two words, Phoenix Protocol, sent a jolt of electricity down her spine. It was a phrase she hadn't heard in 5 years, one that belonged to her previous life, to classified briefings and secure facilities, not to a random Tuesday in a Manhattan cafe. She fought to keep her expression neutral, even as her mind raced. Phoenix Protocol was a highly classified contingency plan developed for extreme diplomatic emergencies, specifically for situations where an entire intelligence network was compromised simultaneously. It had never been implemented during her time at the State Department. It had been considered a theoretical last resort, the intelligence community's equivalent of a nuclear option. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. If Phoenix Protocol was active now, the implications were staggering. It meant that someone, somewhere, had initiated a scorched earth policy to protect operatives in the field. It meant that lives were at stake, potentially dozens of them. And it meant that the man at table 12 was almost certainly not who he appeared to be. Eliza kept her eyes fixed on her book, though the words had become meaningless shapes on the page. Years of training kicked in automatically as she cataloged details without appearing to look. The man's polished shoes, expensive but well-worn, his manicured hands, no wedding ring, but a faint tan line where one might have been, the slight bulge under his left arm that suggested a shoulder holster. She needed to leave. Whatever was happening, it wasn't her concern anymore. She had left that world behind, had been forced out in disgrace. This was someone else's problem now. And yet, if Phoenix Protocol was truly active, the situation must be dire indeed. The protocol had been designed by people she had once known, people she had respected. Some of them might still be in the field. Some of them might be in danger. As these thoughts raced through her mind, the man at table 12 stood abruptly, leaving his half-finished coffee on the table. He slipped his phone into his pocket, donned his coat with practiced efficiency, and headed toward the door. As he passed her table, his eyes met hers for the briefest of moments, a glance that could have been completely meaningless or profoundly intentional. In that split-second connection, Eliza felt certain of one thing. He had said those words, Phoenix Protocol, loudly enough for her to hear. This had not been coincidence. This had been a message. The bell chimed again as the man exited the cafe, disappearing into the curtain of rain outside. Eliza remained frozen in place, her mind working furiously to process what had just happened and what it might mean. After 5 years of self-imposed exile, someone had found her. Someone knew who she really was. And someone wanted her to know about Phoenix Protocol. Why? The question pounded in her head like a second heartbeat. Why now? Why here? What could possibly be gained by pulling her back into a world that had already chewed her up and spat her out? Eliza forced herself to take a slow, measured breath. Perhaps she was overreacting. Perhaps Phoenix Protocol had taken on some innocent meaning in the years since she'd left government service. Perhaps it was now the name of a tech startup or a marketing strategy or a fitness regimen. Perhaps this was all an elaborate coincidence. But she knew better. In her former line of work, There was no such thing as coincidence, only patterns not yet recognized. With trembling fingers that betrayed her outwardly calm demeanor, Eliza marked her place in her book and slipped it into her messenger bag. She left exact change for her tea on the table, including her usual modest tip. Nothing about her behavior could suggest alarm or hurry. If she was being watched, and she had to assume she was, any deviation from her normal patterns would be noted. As she stepped outside, the rain immediately began to soak through her cardigan. She had forgotten her umbrella at home that morning, a small oversight that now seemed laden with consequence. The street was busy with pedestrians huddled under umbrellas, creating a sea of bobbing canopies in various colors. Eliza scanned the crowd as casually as possible, looking for the man from table 12, but he had vanished as thoroughly as morning mist. She began walking toward the subway entrance 2 blocks away, her mind churning with possibilities. If this was indeed a deliberate contact, what was she supposed to do next? In the old days, there would have been a protocol to follow, a series of predetermined steps to take in case of emergency contact. But she had been a civilian for 5 years now. She had no handler, no safe house, no extraction plan. She was on her own. As Eliza descended the steps to the subway platform, she felt the weight of eyes upon her. It was a sensation she remembered from her training, the prickling awareness of being observed. She resisted the urge to look around frantically. Instead, she took a position against the wall, where she could survey the entire platform while appearing to be absorbed in adjusting her bag. The platform was moderately crowded with the usual mix of New Yorkers, office workers checking their phones, students with headphones, tourists consulting subway maps with confused expressions. Nothing seemed out of place, and yet everything felt wrong. The subway arrived with a rush of displaced air, and Eliza boarded along with the crowd, choosing a spot near the door where she could exit quickly if needed. As the train pulled away from the station, she caught a glimpse of a figure on the platform, a woman in a red coat who had been standing near her but had not boarded. The woman was watching the train depart with unusual intensity. 3 stops later, Eliza exited the train and immediately blended into the crowd heading toward the street. Instead of taking her usual route home, she made a split-second decision to implement one of the old counter-surveillance techniques she had been taught. She entered a department store with multiple exits, wandered through the cosmetics section where mirrors would help her spot a tail, and then left through a side entrance onto a different street. Her apartment was in a modest building in Sunnyside, Queens, deliberately chosen for its unremarkable nature and the anonymity it afforded. By the time she reached her door, the rain had stopped, but her clothes were still damp, and her nerves were strung tight as piano wire. Inside her apartment, Eliza performed a quick but thorough check, a habit she had never quite abandoned. Nothing seemed disturbed. The cheap alarm system she had installed showed no signs of tampering. The stack of mail on her small dining table was exactly as she had left it that morning. She hung her wet cardigan in the bathroom and changed into dry clothes, all the while trying to make sense of what had happened at the cafe. If Phoenix Protocol was truly active, it meant a major intelligence failure had occurred or was imminent. It meant that assets were being burned, networks dismantled, covers blown. It meant chaos and danger for people she had once worked alongside. But what did it have to do with her? She had been out of the game for years. Her security clearance was long expired. Any intelligence she possessed was outdated and likely useless. Unless a disturbing thought formed in her mind. What if the Vienna incident, the catastrophic failure that had ended her career, was somehow connected to whatever was happening now? What if she possessed a piece of information, some detail she had observed or reported, that had suddenly become relevant again? Eliza moved to her living room window and carefully peered out from behind the curtain. The street below appeared normal, with no suspicious vehicles or loiterers, but that meant little. If professionals were watching her, she wouldn't be able to spot them so easily. Her phone buzzed with a text message, making her jump. It was from her supervisor at the translation agency. "Can you take on an urgent German technical manual? Deadline Friday." Ordinary life, continuing as if nothing had changed. As if the words Phoenix Protocol hadn't just detonated like a bomb in her carefully constructed reality. Eliza texted back a brief affirmative, then stared at her phone, debating her next move. She still had contacts, people who might know what was happening, people who might be willing to talk to her despite her disgrace. But reaching out would signal her interest, would potentially put her back on the radar of agencies that had been content to forget her existence for the past 5 years. Was it worth the risk? The question hung in the air as she paced her small apartment, memories flooding back with unexpected clarity. She remembered the first time she'd been approached by government recruiters during her senior year at Georgetown. Their barely concealed excitement when they discovered her facility with obscure Caucasian dialects. She remembered the rigorous training, the camaraderie, the sense of purpose that came with serving something larger than herself. And she remembered Vienna, the intercept she had flagged as suspicious, the senior officials who had dismissed her concerns, the subsequent explosion at the embassy annex that killed 3 staff members, the internal investigation that had somehow twisted her prescient warning into evidence of her incompetence and poor judgment, the quiet suggestion that she resign rather than face a formal inquiry that would permanently mar her record. Eliza had left with her reputation in tatters, but her freedom and future intact, a better outcome than some had faced in similar circumstances. She had created a new identity, not officially but effectively, distancing herself from Elizabeth Mercer and all that name represented. She had found a quiet, unremarkable life that allowed her to use at least some of her linguistic skills without any of the pressure or scrutiny. And now, with 2 words spoken by a stranger, that carefully constructed sanctuary was threatening to crumble. Eliza made a decision. She would give herself 24 hours to determine whether what had happened at the cafe was truly relevant to her or merely a bizarre coincidence. She would make one, and only one, call to a former colleague who might provide insight without immediately reporting the contact. And if, after a day of cautious investigation, she found nothing concrete connecting Phoenix Protocol to her specifically, she would resume her quiet life and do her best to forget the incident altogether. She reached for her laptop and opened it, navigating to a secure email service she had maintained over the years but rarely used. She composed a brief, carefully worded message to Daniel Westwood, a former analyst who had been one of the few to treat her kindly during the Vienna fallout. The message contained no explicit references to her identity or to classified information, just an innocuous request to catch up over coffee and a casual mention of a mutual friend from Phoenix they might discuss. After triple-checking the wording, Eliza hit send, then immediately closed the laptop. It was done. The first small step back toward a world she had sworn never to re-enter. A world of shadows and secrets, of half-truths and coded messages. A world where people like the man at table 12 could upend lives with 2 carefully chosen words. As evening fell, Eliza prepared a simple dinner and tried to focus on translating the technical manual her supervisor had sent. But the German terminology for industrial valve components couldn't hold her attention. Her mind kept returning to the cafe, to the man's deliberate gaze, to those 2 words that had shattered her hard-won peace. Phoenix Protocol. If it was active, people were dying. Networks were being dismantled. Years of careful intelligence work was being sacrificed in a desperate attempt to contain some catastrophic breach. And someone thought she needed to know about it. Eliza barely slept that night, startling at every sound from the street below. By morning, there was still no response from Daniel. This wasn't entirely surprising. He might be traveling, or he might be deliberately taking his time to respond to an unexpected message from someone with her complicated history. Or he might have reported her contact attempt up the chain of command, in which case she could expect a much less friendly form of communication soon. She went through her morning routine mechanically, making coffee, checking news websites for any international incidents that might explain the activation of Phoenix Protocol, and preparing for her day as if nothing had changed. She would go to the translation agency's office today rather than working from home, partly to maintain her normal schedule, and partly because she didn't want to be alone with her thoughts. As Eliza locked her apartment door, she noticed her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Petrovich, struggling with a bag of groceries further down the hallway. In her previous life, such details might have registered as background noise, irrelevant to her mission. Now, in her civilian existence, she had learned to notice the small human moments that comprised ordinary life. "Here, let me help you with those," Eliza offered, taking the heavier of the bags. Mrs. Petrovich smiled gratefully. Such a nice girl. Always so quiet, but so helpful. It was the identity Eliza had carefully cultivated. The quiet, helpful neighbor who never drew attention to herself. Forgettable. Unremarkable. Safe. As they reached Mrs. Petrovich's door, the older woman fumbled for her keys. "Oh, I almost forgot to tell you. A man was asking about you yesterday." Eliza's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. "Oh? What kind of man?" "Very polite. Well-dressed. Said he was an old friend trying to reconnect. I told him I didn't know much about you, which is true. You keep to yourself, but I said you were a good neighbor." "Did he leave a name?" Eliza asked, working to keep her voice casual. Mrs. Petrovich frowned in concentration. "Something common. John? Maybe? Or James. My memory isn't what it used to be." Eliza helped the older woman with her groceries, her mind racing. Someone had found her address. Someone was asking questions. The coincidence with the cafe incident was too great to ignore. "What did you tell him?" Eliza asked, arranging Mrs. Petrovich's canned goods in her cupboard. "Not much to tell. That you're quiet, work with languages, moved in about 3 years ago." "Was I not supposed to say anything?" Worry creased the older woman's face. Eliza forced a reassuring smile. No, it's fine. I'm just surprised an old friend would track me down here instead of calling." After making sure Mrs. Petrovich was settled, Eliza left for work, her senses on high alert. The ordinary morning commute now felt like navigating a minefield. Every person who held her gaze for a fraction too long, every car that remained behind her for more than a few blocks, all triggered the hypervigilance she had worked so hard to suppress these past 5 years. At the translation agency, Eliza buried herself in work, grateful for the mind-numbing complexity of German technical specifications. Her cubicle was positioned with her back to a wall, another habit from her previous life that she had never been able to break, giving her a clear view of the office entrance. Around noon, her phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Daniel, terse and cryptic. "Coffee sounds good. Today, 2 p.m. The place where we celebrated Nakamura's promotion." Eliza stared at the message, her throat suddenly dry. The place where they had celebrated Nakamura's promotion had been a small Russian tea house in Brighton Beach, a location deliberately chosen for its obscurity and distance from their usual haunts. The fact that Daniel had specified this location rather than suggesting somewhere convenient meant he was taking serious precautions, which meant whatever was happening was very real and very dangerous. Eliza informed her supervisor she needed to leave early for a medical appointment, then headed toward Brighton Beach. She took a circuitous route, changing trains twice and exiting one station only to re-enter at a different entrance. Basic counter-surveillance measures that felt simultaneously ridiculous and desperately necessary. The Russian tea house looked exactly as she remembered it, a small, unassuming establishment with heavy curtains and private booths. The air inside was warm and fragrant with the scent of spiced tea and pastries. A few patrons sat at scattered tables, speaking in hushed tones over steaming samovars. Daniel was already there, seated in the farthest booth from the door. He had aged in the 5 years since she'd seen him last, his sandy hair now streaked with gray, new lines etched around his eyes and mouth. But his posture was still military straight, his gaze still sharp and assessing. He didn't stand when she approached, just gestured for her to take the seat opposite him, positioning her with her back to the wall as well. Old habits. "Elizabeth," he said quietly, using her former name. "You look well." "It's Eliza now," she corrected him. "And you look tired." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Straight to the point. That hasn't changed." A server approached and they ordered tea and pierogies, a delaying tactic to ensure privacy. When the server had retreated, Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Your message was unexpected," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why now, after all this time?" Eliza studied him, looking for signs of deception or ulterior motives. Daniel had been one of the few who had stood by her during the Vienna disaster, who had believed her warnings had been justified, even if they had been ignored. But 5 years was a long time, and loyalties shifted like sand in their former profession. "Someone approached me," she said finally. "Or at least, I think they did. A man at a cafe mentioned Phoenix Protocol loudly enough for me to hear. Then someone asked my neighbor about me. I need to know if this is relevant to me or if I'm being paranoid." Daniel's face remained impressively neutral, but Eliza caught the slight tightening around his eyes, a micro-expression that confirmed her fears before he even spoke. "You're not being paranoid," he said after a long pause. "Phoenix Protocol is active, and yes, it concerns you, though I'm surprised they would make contact so theatrically." "They? Who is they?" The server returned with their tea, and they fell silent until they were alone again. Daniel added a spoonful of jam to his tea, stirring methodically before answering. "Things have changed since you left." "The Vienna incident." "It wasn't what you thought. What any of us thought." Eliza felt a chill that had nothing to do with the tea house's robust air conditioning. "What do you mean?" Daniel glanced around the room once more before continuing. "The intelligence failure wasn't a failure at all. It was engineered. Someone wanted that explosion to happen, someone on the inside. Your warnings were suppressed deliberately, and you were made the scapegoat to divert attention from the real culprits." The words hit Eliza like physical blows. She had spent years believing she had somehow failed, that despite her best efforts, she had missed something crucial that might have prevented tragedy. To hear now that she had been right all along, that her warnings had been deliberately ignored, it was both vindicating and horrifying. "How long have you known this?" she asked, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "Suspected for years. Confirmed only recently." Daniel took a careful sip of his tea. "There's a small group of us who have been quietly investigating. We believe Vienna was just one operation in a larger pattern of sabotage, a pattern that suggests a deeply embedded network of double agents within our intelligence community." "And Phoenix Protocol?" "It's been activated because the network is finally being exposed. Certain parties higher up have decided to burn everything to the ground, rather than risk a more careful extraction of the compromised elements." Bitterness tinged his voice. "It's a scorched earth approach that will cost lives and set our intelligence capabilities back decades." "But what does any of this have to do with me?" Eliza pressed. "I've been out for 5 years. Whatever I knew then is hopelessly outdated now." Daniel met her gaze directly. "Because you were right about Vienna when everyone else was wrong. Because your analysis of the communications intercept showed patterns that no one else recognized. And because the people who engineered your downfall are the same ones who are now implementing Phoenix Protocol to cover their tracks." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small envelope, sliding it across the table to her. "This contains an address and instructions. A group of us, former colleagues who believe as I do that Phoenix Protocol is being misused, are meeting tonight to share information and determine next steps. Your presence would be valuable." Eliza stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. "You're asking me to throw away 5 years of rebuilding my life, to potentially put myself in danger for an agency that already sacrificed me once." "Not for the agency," Daniel corrected. "For the truth. For the people who died in Vienna and those who might die if we don't intervene. And," he added more quietly, "for yourself. Don't you want to know what really happened? Don't you want your name cleared?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Did she want vindication? Of course. Did she want to understand why her career and reputation had been destroyed? Absolutely. But was she willing to risk what little peace she had found to pursue those answers? "I need to think about this," she said finally. Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The meeting is at 8. If you decide not to come, burn that envelope and forget we spoke. Go back to your translation work and your quiet life. No one would blame you." He paused. "But if you do come, bring that analytical mind that impressed us all so much. We need people who can see patterns others miss." He stood then, placing money on the table to cover their barely touched tea. "For what it's worth, I always believed in you, Elizabeth, even when the evidence seemed stacked against you. Some instincts transcend evidence." With that, he walked away, leaving Eliza alone with an envelope that represented a crossroads in her carefully reconstructed life. A choice between continued anonymity and potential danger. Between acceptance of past injustices and the pursuit of uncomfortable truths. Between being Eliza Morgan, unremarkable translator, and becoming Elizabeth Mercer once more, the analyst whose rare talent for patterns had once been deemed once in a generation. As she finally reached for the envelope, slipping it into her pocket, Eliza realized that the stranger at table 12 had done more than speak 2 words that connected to her past. He had awakened something she had tried desperately to suppress for 5 long years. A hunger for truth, for vindication, and for the chance to use her unique abilities for something that mattered. Phoenix Protocol had been activated, and despite her best efforts to remain in the shadows, it seemed that Eliza Morgan was being called back into the light, whether she was ready or not. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in Eliza's pocket as she left the Russian tea house, its contents representing a future she had never expected to confront again. Outside, the afternoon sun struggled to penetrate a layer of clouds, casting Brighton Beach in a muted glow that matched her uncertainty. She walked aimlessly for several blocks, mind churning with the implications of Daniel's revelations. Vienna hadn't been her failure, she had been right all along. The thought kept repeating, a drumbeat of vindication that both comforted and disturbed her. If what Daniel said was true, she had spent 5 years in self-imposed exile for nothing. 5 years believing herself responsible for deaths that others had orchestrated. The injustice of it burned like acid in her chest. Eliza found herself at the boardwalk, staring out at the steel-gray Atlantic. The beach was nearly empty on this weekday afternoon. Just a few elderly couples walking slowly along the shore and a solitary figure flying a kite in the distance. The rhythmic crash of waves against sand provided a soothing counterpoint to her chaotic thoughts. She withdrew the envelope from her pocket, turning it over in her hands. Inside lay an address and instructions, the first step toward reclaiming a life she had been forced to abandon. But was that what she wanted? The quiet existence she had built as Eliza Morgan had its merits. No one died because of her decisions. No one scrutinized her every move or judgment. She answered only to herself. And yet, that life had never fully satisfied the part of her that craved purpose, that thrived on solving complex puzzles, that wanted to make a meaningful difference in the world. She had tried to silence that voice with routine and modest ambitions, but it had never truly disappeared. With careful fingers, she opened the envelope. Inside was a single card with an address in Red Hook, Brooklyn, a warehouse district near the waterfront, and a time, 8 p.m. Below the address was a series of numbers that Eliza immediately recognized as coordinates for an emergency exfiltration point. Daniel was taking no chances. He was providing her with an escape route should the meeting be compromised. The thoroughness of the precaution sent a chill through her. This wasn't a casual gathering of disgruntled former colleagues. This was a clandestine operation with real risks. Eliza checked her watch, nearly 4 o'clock. She had 4 hours to decide whether to attend the meeting or burn the card and return to her carefully constructed anonymity. 4 hours to choose between safety and truth, between comfortable obscurity and dangerous purpose. She slipped the card back into the envelope and began walking toward the subway station. She would go home, gather her thoughts, and make her decision there. The familiar surroundings of her apartment might help clarify her thinking. The train ride back to Queens was uneventful, but Eliza found herself studying her fellow passengers with renewed attentiveness. The young man intensely focused on his phone. Was he really texting, or was he documenting her movements? The woman with the shopping bags who had boarded at the same station, coincidence or surveillance? The hyper-vigilance she had worked so hard to suppress came flooding back with disorienting intensity. By the time she reached her apartment building, Eliza felt mentally exhausted from the constant assessment of threats that probably didn't exist. She climbed the stairs rather than taking the elevator, another old habit resurfacing. Elevators were confined spaces with limited escape routes. Her apartment door showed no signs of tampering, but she entered cautiously nonetheless. Everything appeared exactly as she had left it that morning, yet somehow the space felt different, as if the mere knowledge that someone had been asking about her had transformed her sanctuary into potentially hostile territory. Eliza made tea, a ritual that had always helped her think, and sat at her small kitchen table, the envelope placed squarely before her. The decision she faced wasn't simply about attending one meeting. It was about which version of herself she would choose to be going forward. Elizabeth Mercer had been brilliant, dedicated, and ultimately betrayed by the very institution she had served. Eliza Morgan was ordinary, safe, and fundamentally unfulfilled. Neither identity felt entirely right anymore. As she sipped her tea, Eliza allowed herself to remember details of her former life that she had long suppressed. The exhilaration of cracking a particularly difficult linguistic puzzle, the camaraderie of working with a team toward a common goal, the deep satisfaction of knowing her work protected people who would never know her name. There had been a purpose to that existence that translation work, however mentally challenging, could never provide. She had made a difference then. She had mattered. And if Daniel was right, if she had been deliberately silenced because she had seen something others had missed, then perhaps she could matter again. The thought crystallized her decision. She would attend the meeting. She would hear what Daniel and the others had to say. She would learn the truth about Vienna, about her disgrace, about the mysterious Phoenix Protocol. And then, with all the facts before her, she would decide what to do next. Decision made, Eliza moved with newfound determination. She changed into dark, nondescript clothing that would allow her to blend into the shadows of Red Hook's industrial landscape. She retrieved a small go-bag from the back of her closet, a precaution she had maintained even during her years of civilian life, containing cash, a prepaid phone, basic toiletries, and a change of clothes. Some habits, it seemed, had been impossible to break, as if some part of her had always known this day might come. At 7 o'clock, Eliza left her apartment, the address memorized and the card destroyed as per standard protocol. She took a deliberately complex route to Red Hook, using multiple subway lines, doubling back occasionally, and walking the final mile to ensure she wasn't followed. The warehouse district was eerily quiet at night. Most of the businesses closed until morning. Occasional security lights cast pools of harsh illumination amid stretches of deep shadow. The smell of the nearby harbor, briny and industrial, permeated the air. Eliza moved silently along the edges of buildings, hyper-aware of her surroundings in a way she hadn't been for years. The address led her to a nondescript brick building that might once have been a manufacturing facility. A single light burned above a metal door on the side of the structure. No signs indicated its purpose. No cameras were visible, though Eliza assumed they were there, hidden in the building's architecture. She approached cautiously, every sense alert for signs of danger or surveillance. When she reached the door, she found it locked with an intercom panel beside it. She pressed the single button. "Yes?" A distorted voice emanated from the speaker. "I'm here about Phoenix," Eliza said, keeping her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. A pause then. "Analysts don't field verify." Eliza recognized the challenge phrase immediately, a security protocol from her time at the agency. She provided the correct response. "Unless the field is linguistic." The door buzzed, and Eliza pulled it open, stepping into a dimly lit corridor. The door closed behind her with a heavy metallic clang that sounded unnervingly final. At the end of the corridor stood a tall figure whose silhouette she recognized immediately. Daniel. He beckoned her forward without speaking. "Am I late?" Eliza asked, her voice hushed in the quiet space. "No, you're right on time." Daniel gave her a searching look. "I wasn't sure you'd come. Neither was I." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The others are waiting." He led her through another door, into what appeared to be an open office space that had been hastily converted into a makeshift operations center. 3 people huddled around a table covered with laptops, maps, and documents. They looked up as Eliza entered, their expressions varying from surprise to wary assessment. Eliza recognized 2 of them immediately. Vanessa Cortez had been a counterintelligence specialist, known for her methodical dismantling of foreign agent networks. Michael Faraday had been a technical analyst whose expertise in cryptography had saved countless operations. The third person, a younger man with sharp features and watchful eyes, was unfamiliar to her. "Elizabeth," Vanessa said, using her old name. There was a hint of warmth in her voice, but her expression remained guarded. "It's been a long time." 5 years, 2 months. Eliza responded automatically, then felt self-conscious about the precision. Old habits. "This is Julian." Daniel introduced the unknown man. "He joined after your time, but he's been instrumental in piecing together what we're about to share with you." Julian gave a curt nod but offered no greeting. His gaze was calculating, assessing her as one might evaluate a tool for its potential usefulness. "You should sit," Michael suggested, pulling out a chair. "This is going to take some time to explain." Eliza took the offered seat, noticing that it positioned her with her back to a wall and a clear view of both the entrance and a rear exit. A professional courtesy that spoke volumes about their continuing adherence to security protocols even in this unauthorized setting. "Before we begin," Daniel said, "I need to be clear about something. What we're doing here is unsanctioned. Technically treasonous, according to some interpretations. Once you hear what we have to say, you can't unhear it. If you have any doubts about being involved, now is the time to leave." Eliza looked around at the faces watching her, people who had once been colleagues, who had risked their careers and possibly their lives to uncover whatever truth they believed had been hidden. She thought of her quiet apartment in Queens, of her unremarkable job translating technical manuals, of the life she had built from the ashes of her disgrace. "I'm here," she said simply. "Tell me everything." Daniel exchanged glances with the others, received nods of agreement, and turned to a laptop. He typed briefly, then turned the screen toward her. On it was a photograph Eliza recognized immediately. The aftermath of the Vienna explosion, the embassy annex reduced to rubble, emergency workers sifting through debris. "This is where it started," Daniel said, "or at least where it started for you. For us, the pattern emerged more slowly, over years." "What pattern?" Eliza asked, though a part of her, the analyst part, that had never truly gone dormant, was already beginning to see connections. "Systematic sabotage of our intelligence operations," Vanessa explained, her voice clipped and professional. "Vienna was one incident in a series that stretches back at least a decade. Operations compromised, assets exposed, agents killed or disappeared. Each incident isolated enough to be explained away as bad luck or individual failure. But together they form a pattern," Julian added, speaking for the first time. His voice was precise, academic. "A pattern of deliberate undermining of specific intelligence-gathering efforts." Michael spread several documents on the table, heavily redacted reports that Eliza recognized as internal investigations into failed operations. "These all have something in common," he said. "They all targeted operations focused on a specific type of threat." Eliza scanned the documents quickly, her mind automatically sorting and categorizing the information. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable once you knew to look for it. "They were all investigating financial networks," she said. "Money laundering operations, specifically." Daniel nodded, a glimmer of approval in his eyes. "You always were quick." "But why?" Eliza pressed. "Why target specifically those operations?" "Because they were getting too close to uncovering something massive," Vanessa said. "A network of shell companies and hidden accounts that we believe is being used to fund everything from terrorism to election interference to assassinations. We call it the Helix," Julian explained. "A complex, intertwined system of financial conduits that obscures the true source and destination of billions of dollars." Eliza frowned, processing this information. "And you believe someone within our own intelligence community is protecting this helix? Why?" "Because they're part of it," Daniel said grimly. "Because they profit from it. Because they serve masters other than the ones they've sworn to serve." The implications were staggering. Traitors within the highest levels of intelligence agencies, systematically sabotaging investigations that might expose their illicit financial network. It seemed almost too vast, too conspiratorial to be believable. And yet, as Eliza examined the evidence they presented, document after document, incident after incident, failure after suspicious failure, the pattern became increasingly difficult to dismiss. "Vienna," she said quietly. "The intercept I flagged. It mentioned a financial transfer to an account in Cyprus." Daniel's expression confirmed her recollection. "A transfer from an account later linked to the bombing. You spotted it because of an anomaly in the language used. a dialectical irregularity that suggested the sender wasn't who they claimed to be. And when I reported it, your warning was buried. Vanessa finished for her, deliberately suppressed by Assistant Director Lawrence Hadley. The name hit Eliza like a physical blow. Hadley had been her superior, the man who had personally recommended her termination after the Vienna disaster. The man who had looked her in the eye and told her she had failed her country. Hadley is involved in this. The question came out as barely more than a whisper. The four exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Daniel spoke. We believe Hadley is more than involved. We believe he's one of the architects of the entire operation. And now, he's the one who's initiated Phoenix Protocol. Eliza's mind raced, fitting this new information into the larger puzzle. Phoenix Protocol was designed for situations where intelligence networks were catastrophically compromised, a scorched earth policy to dismantle everything and start fresh. He's using Phoenix Protocol to eliminate evidence, she realized aloud, to cut off loose ends, to bury whatever trail might lead back to him and this. Helix. Julian nodded, seemingly impressed by her quick grasp of the situation. And to eliminate people who know too much or might piece it together. People like us, Michael added soberly. And now, people like you, Daniel concluded. When you responded to my message, you went back on the radar. They'll know we've made contact. Eliza absorbed this, understanding the full weight of her decision to attend this meeting. Simply by being here, she had placed herself in danger. She had become a target for people who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill to protect their secrets. What are you planning to do? She asked. The five of us against what sounds like a deeply embedded network within the intelligence community. Those aren't promising odds. 6, actually, came a new voice from the rear entrance. Eliza turned to see a man she didn't recognize. Tall, with silver-streaked dark hair, and the weathered look of a field operative. Something about his bearing suggested military training. This is Connor Reed, Daniel introduced him. Former Special Activities. He's been working the operational side of our investigation. Reed nodded to Eliza. Mercer, your reputation precedes you. Clearly not all aspects of my reputation, she replied dryly, or you wouldn't want me anywhere near this operation. A ghost of a smile crossed Reed's face. I've learned to form my own judgments about people. Connor has been tracking the financial side of the Helix, Vanessa explained, following money trails across multiple jurisdictions. And I found something, Reed said, approaching the table and laying down a flash drive. Something big enough that it might give us leverage. Daniel plugged the drive into a laptop, and a series of financial records appeared on screen. Eliza leaned forward, studying the complex web of transactions, her analytical mind already beginning to detect patterns within the chaos of numbers. These are transfers between accounts we've linked to the Helix, Reed explained, but what's significant is the timing. Eliza saw it almost immediately. They correlate with significant political events. Elections, assassinations, coup attempts, Reed nodded, looking faintly impressed. Your file didn't exaggerate your pattern recognition abilities. What's this one? Eliza pointed to a particularly large transfer that had occurred just 3 weeks earlier. The group exchanged glances, and Daniel spoke. That's why Phoenix Protocol has been activated now. That transfer is connected to an operation aimed at destabilizing our relations with 3 key allies simultaneously. An operation that's currently in motion. We believe Phoenix Protocol is being used not just to cover tracks but to actually facilitate this operation, Vanessa added. By dismantling our legitimate intelligence networks, they're creating blind spots exactly where we need visibility most. Eliza sat back, the enormity of the situation washing over her. This wasn't just about her personal vindication anymore. This was about preventing a massive intelligence failure that could have geopolitical consequences. What do you need from me? She asked finally. Your linguistic expertise, Daniel said. Your ability to see patterns others miss. The operation hinges on communications that use a sophisticated coding system embedded within what appear to be routine diplomatic exchanges. We've gathered hundreds of these communications, but we can't break the pattern. And you think I can? We know you can, Michael said simply. It's why you were targeted after Vienna. Your ability to spot anomalies in language patterns made you dangerous to them. It's why they made sure you were discredited so thoroughly that no one would ever listen to you again. The validation of her skills, the confirmation that she had been right all along, filled Eliza with a complex mixture of emotions. Vindication tinged with lingering anger, pride shadowed by the weight of years lost to undeserved disgrace. "I haven't done analytical work in 5 years," she cautioned. "I'm out of practice." "Some skills don't fade," Reed said, with the certainty of someone who had relied on ingrained training in life-or-death situations. "They just wait to be used again." Eliza looked around at the makeshift operations center, at the people who had risked everything to uncover a conspiracy that stretched to the highest levels of government. They were offering her a chance to reclaim her purpose, to use her unique abilities for something that mattered profoundly. But they were also asking her to place herself directly in the crosshairs of powerful people who had already destroyed her once. "If I do this," she said slowly, "if I help you break this code and expose the operation, what happens next? What's the endgame?" "We take our evidence to the Director of National Intelligence," Daniel explained, bypassing the compromised channels. "With concrete proof of Hadley's involvement and the larger conspiracy, the DNI would have no choice but to act." "And if the DNI is also compromised?" Eliza asked, giving voice to the question that hung unspoken in the air. A heavy silence fell over the room. "Then we go to Plan B," Reed said finally. "We have contacts in select media organizations who would publish the evidence, regardless of the classification level. It would be messy, potentially damaging to legitimate operations, but it would expose the conspiracy. And guarantee that none of us would ever work in intelligence again," Vanessa added. "Possibly that we'd spend the rest of our lives in federal prison." The stakes could hardly be higher. Eliza looked down at her hands, steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. 5 years ago, she had walked away from a fight she should have won. She had accepted disgrace rather than continuing to push for the truth. She had chosen safety over justice. Could she live with making that same choice again? "When do we start?" she asked, raising her eyes to meet Daniel's gaze. Relief washed over his features. "Now. Tonight. We don't have much time before Phoenix Protocol reaches a point of no return." Reed pulled a laptop from a nearby desk and placed it before Eliza. "This contains all the communications we've gathered. They're organized chronologically, but feel free to sort them however works best for your analysis." Eliza opened the laptop, feeling a strange sense of homecoming as she faced a complex analytical challenge once more. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, muscle memory from years of similar work returning in a rush. "I'll need coffee," she said, slipping naturally back into the role of the focused analyst she had once been. "And something to write with. I still do my best pattern mapping by hand." As the others moved to accommodate her requests, Eliza began scanning the first few communications. They appeared to be standard diplomatic cables discussing trade agreements and cultural exchanges, but almost immediately she noticed subtle inconsistencies, word choices that seemed just slightly off, sentence structures that deviated from diplomatic norms in ways so small they would be invisible to anyone without her specific training. The pattern was there, hidden in plain sight. She could feel it, like a melody played just below the threshold of conscious hearing. With growing excitement, she realized that her ability hadn't diminished during her years of exile. If anything, it had been refined by her work with technical translations, which required similar attention to minute details and structural patterns. For the first time in 5 years, Elizabeth Mercer, the brilliant analyst with the once-in-a-generation gift for linguistic patterns, was truly awake again. And she was exactly where she needed to be, doing the work she had been born to do. As the night deepened around the warehouse and her new allies moved quietly about their tasks, Eliza felt something she had almost forgotten: the electric thrill of pursuing a difficult puzzle, of using her unique talents to their fullest extent, of serving a purpose larger than herself. The stranger at table 12 had spoken 2 words that had shattered her carefully constructed piece, but in doing so, he had also given her back a part of herself she had thought lost forever. Phoenix Protocol had been meant to burn everything to ashes. Instead, it had become the spark that reignited her true identity. Whatever dangers lay ahead, whatever price she might ultimately pay for her involvement, Eliza knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. She was done hiding in the shadows of a lesser life. She was done accepting injustice to preserve her safety. She was done being Eliza Morgan, unremarkable translator. It was time to become Elizabeth Mercer once more, the woman whose remarkable mind might just save countless lives and expose a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of power. The woman who had been silenced once but would not be silenced again. With renewed determination, she immersed herself in the coded communications, knowing that somewhere within their seemingly innocuous text lay secrets that powerful people would kill to protect, and that she alone might have the ability to uncover. The first glimmers of dawn were breaking through the warehouse's high windows as Eliza sat surrounded by printouts, digital files, and handwritten notes. Her eyes burned from hours of intense focus, but her mind remained sharp, driven by a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. The pattern had begun to emerge. Subtle, intricate, almost artistic in its complexity. "I think I've got something," she announced, her voice cutting through the hush that had fallen over the makeshift operations center. The others who had been working on their own aspects of the investigation gathered around her workstation. They looked as exhausted as she felt, Daniel with stubble darkening his jaw, Vanessa with her normally immaculate hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, Michael blinking owlishly behind smudged glasses. "The code isn't embedded in individual words or phrases," Eliza explained, indicating her color-coded notes. "It's in the pattern of minor grammatical variations across multiple communications. Taken individually, each variation looks like nothing more than a slightly awkward phrasing or a minor error, the kind of thing that happens when non-native speakers draft diplomatic cables. But together, they form a message," Daniel guessed, leaning forward to examine her work. "Exactly. It's brilliant, really. The variations create a secondary text that's virtually invisible unless you're specifically looking for it and know exactly how to look." Reed, who had been monitoring communications from the corner of the room, approached with renewed interest. "Can you decode it?" "I already have, partially." Eliza indicated a separate sheet where she had begun to reconstruct the hidden message. "It confirms everything you've suspected. These communications are coordinating some kind of synchronized operation across multiple countries, timed to coincide with the implementation of Phoenix Protocol." Julian frowned, studying her notes. "How can you be sure?" "Because they're using a variant of a coding system I helped develop 6 years ago," Eliza replied, unable to keep a note of irony from her voice. "A system that was classified at the highest levels. Only a handful of people had access to it, including Assistant Director Hadley." Daniel noted grimly. "Yes." Eliza pushed aside a strand of hair that had fallen across her face. "But they've modified it, made it more sophisticated. That's why it took me so long to recognize the base pattern." "What does the message say?" Vanessa pressed. Eliza consulted her notes. "It's still fragmentary, but it mentions synchronized action at multiple points with a timeline of 72 hours from protocol initiation." "Phoenix Protocol was initiated approximately 60 hours ago," Michael said, checking his watch. "That gives us less than 12 hours before whatever they're planning happens." "We need to move faster," Reed decided. "Elizabeth, what do you need to complete the decoding?" The use of her full first name, her real name, no longer felt strange. In fact, it felt right, like slipping back into a favorite coat she had forgotten how comfortable it could be. "More communications to analyze," she replied without hesitation. "The more examples I have, the more complete the pattern becomes, especially anything sent in the last 24 hours. "I might be able to help with that," Julian said unexpectedly. He moved to his own laptop and began typing rapidly. "I've been developing a backdoor into the diplomatic communication system. It's not fully tested, but given the time constraints—" "Do it," Daniel authorized. "Whatever risk we're taking is worth it compared to letting their operation succeed." As Julian worked, Eliza felt a surge of admiration for this makeshift team. They were outcasts and rebels by necessity, operating without official sanction or support, risking everything to prevent a catastrophe no one else even knew was coming. They had recognized a truth that had eluded their superiors, and rather than accepting defeat, they had banded together to fight back. Just as she had once tried to do alone, before Vienna. Julian's triumphant exclamation drew her from her thoughts. "I'm in." "Downloading the latest batch of communications now." "Send them directly to Elizabeth," Daniel instructed. The rest of us should focus on preparations for what comes next. Once we have the complete picture, we'll need to move quickly. New files began populating Eliza's screen, dozens of diplomatic cables from the past 24 hours. She immersed herself in them immediately, her trained eye picking out the subtle variations that constituted the hidden code. With each new communication, the pattern became clearer, the hidden message more complete. As she worked, she heard the others discussing contingency plans, secure channels to reach the Director of National Intelligence, media contacts who could be trusted with classified information as a last resort, extraction plans should their operation be discovered. The stakes couldn't be higher. If they succeeded, they would expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government and prevent whatever coordinated attack was being planned. If they failed, they would likely be branded as traitors, hunted by the very agencies they had once served, their warnings dismissed as the desperate fabrications of disgruntled former operatives. Hours passed in a blur of intense concentration. Eliza barely noticed when someone placed a fresh cup of coffee beside her, or when the angle of sunlight through the warehouse windows shifted. Her world had narrowed to the patterns within the text, the hidden message slowly revealing itself under her expert analysis. Then, suddenly, everything clicked into place. The complete message emerged from the fragments, revealing not just the fact of the planned operation, but its specific targets and timing. "I've got it," she announced, her voice hoarse from disuse but vibrating with urgency. 3 coordinated attacks on diplomatic missions in Berlin, Tokyo, and Cairo, designed to look like the work of domestic extremist groups in each country. Time to coincide with the Phoenix Protocol's dismantling of our monitoring capabilities in those regions. The team gathered around her again, faces grave as they absorbed the implications. "The attacks would severely damage our relationships with key allies," Vanessa observed, "especially if evidence emerges suggesting we had intelligence but failed to share it, which is exactly what will happen once Phoenix Protocol has scrubbed all record of these communications," Michael added. "They're creating the perfect scenario. We'll appear either incompetent or deliberately negligent, and the resulting diplomatic crisis will provide perfect cover for massive financial movements within the helix," Julian concluded. "Stock markets will plunge, currencies will fluctuate wildly, and billions will disappear in the chaos, rerouted through their network of shell companies." Reed finished. "It's elegant, in a truly twisted way." Daniel's expression hardened as he studied the decoded message. "We have the evidence now. We need to get it to the DNI immediately, before these attacks can be carried out." "I've prepared a secure channel," Michael said, "but we need to assume it could be compromised. We should have a backup plan for physical delivery of the evidence." "I'll handle that," Reed volunteered. "I still have contacts who can get me into the DNI's office if necessary." As the team began finalizing their plan, Eliza felt a strange mixture of emotions washing over her. Pride in what she had accomplished, fear of what might happen if they failed, and beneath it all, a profound sense of vindication. Her abilities, the same abilities that had been questioned and dismissed 5 years ago, had just provided the key to uncovering a conspiracy of staggering proportions. She had been right to trust her instincts about the Vienna intercept. She had been right to flag it as suspicious. And now, she had been given a chance to use those same instincts to prevent an even greater tragedy. "Elizabeth," Daniel said, drawing her from her thoughts, "you've done remarkable work here, but what comes next could be dangerous. No one would blame you if you decided to step back now. Let us handle the next phase." Eliza looked around at the faces watching her, people who had believed in her when no one else would, who had risked reaching out to her despite the danger. People who had given her back her purpose, her identity, her sense of self-worth. "I'm seeing this through," she said firmly. "Whatever happens, I'm part of this team now." Relief and appreciation showed in Daniel's eyes. "I hoped you'd say that. We're stronger with you." The next few hours were a flurry of activity as they prepared to deliver their evidence to the Director of National Intelligence. Michael established a secure communication channel, while Reed and Vanessa prepared a comprehensive briefing package that included Eliza's decoded messages, the financial trail of the helix, and evidence of Hadley's involvement in suppressing investigations. Eliza continued refining her analysis, adding additional context and clarification to ensure the evidence would be understood by those without her specialized knowledge. As she worked, A small notification appeared on her screen, an incoming message on a secure channel. She opened it cautiously, then felt her blood run cold as she read its contents. "Daniel," she called, her voice unnaturally steady despite the adrenaline suddenly flooding her system. "We have a problem." He was at her side instantly, reading over her shoulder. The message was brief but devastating. Protocol accelerated. Timeline moved forward. Secure your position immediately. R. "Who's R?" Eliza asked. "Rachel Winters," Daniel explained quickly, already moving toward the others. "She's our inside contact at headquarters. If she's warning us about an acceleration of Phoenix Protocol, it means they know," Reed concluded, joining them. "They know we're on to them." "How much time do we have?" Vanessa demanded. Daniel shook his head grimly. "No way to tell. But we need to assume they're already moving against us." As if to confirm his assessment, Julian's monitoring equipment began emitting a warning tone. "We've got multiple vehicles approaching from the north and east," he reported, bringing up security camera feeds on his screen. "No sirens or lights, but the movement pattern is tactical." Eliza's analytical mind immediately grasped the implications. "They're not coming as law enforcement. They're coming as a cleanup crew." "Execute emergency protocols," Daniel ordered, his voice calm despite the dire situation. "Julian, initiate the data purge, but make sure the backup transmits completely. Michael, get the physical evidence package ready for extraction. Vanessa, coordinate with our outside contacts. Make sure they know what's happening, even if we can't complete the delivery ourselves." As the team moved with practiced efficiency, Eliza found herself momentarily frozen, unsure of her role in this well-rehearsed emergency plan. Then Reed appeared at her side, pressing a small flash drive into her hand. "This contains everything. Your decoded messages, our financial evidence, all of it," he explained rapidly. "The others have copies, but we're splitting up to maximize the chances of at least one package reaching the DNI. What do you need me to do?" Eliza asked, closing her fingers around the drive. "Come with me. I have an extraction route that they won't be expecting. The others have their own paths out." Daniel appeared beside them, his expression grave but determined. "Elizabeth, you need to go with Connor. Your linguistic evidence is the linchpin of our case. Without it, the financial data is suspicious but not conclusive. You need to reach the DNI and explain the code personally." The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders, heavy but not crushing. 5 years ago, she had tried to warn her superiors about a threat and had been silenced. Now, she had a second chance, not just to be heard, but to prevent an even greater catastrophe. "I understand," she said, meeting Daniel's gaze steadily. "But what about you?" "I'll be right behind you with Vanessa. Michael and Julian are taking a different route. We rendezvous at the backup location in 3 hours, assuming we all make it out." The unspoken possibility hung in the air between them. They were facing opponents who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill to protect their secrets. There was a very real chance that not everyone in this room would survive the next few hours. Daniel clasped her shoulder briefly, a gesture that conveyed both confidence and farewell. "You were always the best analyst I ever worked with, Elizabeth. I'm glad we had this chance to set the record straight." Before she could respond, Julian called out from his monitoring station. "They're setting up a perimeter. 2 minutes, maybe less, before they breach." "Go now," Daniel urged, already turning toward his own preparations. "Secondary exit, just like we planned." Reed guided Eliza toward the back of the warehouse, to a metal door partially concealed behind shelving units. Beyond it lay a narrow service corridor that, according to the building plans, connected to an adjacent structure. "Stay close," Reed instructed as he eased the door open, weapon drawn. "Move quickly but quietly, and if something happens to me, your priority is the evidence. Get it to the DNI at all costs." Eliza nodded, tucking the flash drive securely into an inner pocket. The diplomatic attacks were scheduled to occur within hours. If they failed to get the evidence through, people would die, international relations would be severely damaged, and the architects of the conspiracy would profit immensely from the chaos they created. Failure was not an option. They slipped into the corridor just as the sound of the main entrance being breached echoed through the warehouse. Shouted commands and the crash of equipment being overturned followed, but grew fainter as they moved deeper into the maze of service passages. Reed navigated with confidence, suggesting he had thoroughly memorized their escape route. Eliza followed close behind, her senses hyper-alert, cataloging every sound and movement with the trained awareness she had once relied on daily. They emerged into a loading dock area of the adjacent building, momentarily exposed before ducking behind a stack of wooden pallets. Reed scanned their surroundings, then pointed toward a chain-link fence about 50 yards away. "That's our exit point," he whispered. "Once we're past that, we have a vehicle waiting 2 blocks east. Ready?" Eliza nodded, adrenaline sharpening her focus to a razor's edge. They moved from cover to cover, using the pre-dawn shadows to conceal their progress. The fence loomed closer, its gate secured with a heavy chain and padlock. Reed produced a set of compact bolt cutters from his jacket and made quick work of the chain. The gate swung open with a slight metallic groan that seemed thunderous in the quiet morning air. They were halfway through when a shout rang out behind them. Eliza turned to see figures emerging from the building they had just left, pointing in their direction. "Run!" Reed commanded, shoving her through the gate. "Don't stop! Don't look back!" They sprinted down the deserted street, the sound of pursuit growing behind them. Eliza's lungs burned, and her muscles protested, but fear and determination drove her forward. Reed kept pace beside her, occasionally glancing back to assess the distance to their pursuers. "Almost there!" he gasped as they rounded a corner. "The car should be—" A sharp crack split the air, and Reed stumbled mid-stride. Eliza reached out instinctively to steady him, then felt the warm wetness spreading across his jacket. "Blood, go," he urged through gritted teeth, pressing a set of keys into her hand. "Gray sedan, 50 yards ahead. Get to the DNI." "I'm not leaving you," Eliza insisted, supporting his weight as they continued moving. "Slower now." "The evidence is what matters," Reed countered, his voice growing weaker. "If you stay with me, we both fail. Go. Now." The approaching footsteps grew louder. Making a split-second decision, Eliza helped Reed into the narrow space between 2 dumpsters. Not a perfect hiding place, but enough to buy him some time. "I'll send help as soon as I can," she promised, meeting his pain-filled eyes. "Just get the evidence through," he replied. "That's all that matters now." With a final nod, Eliza turned and ran toward the vehicle Reed had indicated. The gray sedan was parked exactly where he had said, unremarkable and anonymous, perfect for their purposes. She unlocked it with trembling hands and slid behind the wheel, starting the engine just as their pursuers appeared at the end of the block. She pulled away from the curb, forcing herself to drive at a normal speed, despite the urge to floor the accelerator. Drawing attention now would only make her easier to track. As she navigated through the slowly awakening streets of Brooklyn, her mind raced with conflicting emotions, concern for Reed and the others, determination to complete their mission, and beneath it all, a burning anger at those who had orchestrated this conspiracy. The flash drive in her pocket contained evidence that could bring down some of the most powerful people in the intelligence community. People who had ruined her career, who had used her as a scapegoat for their own criminal activities, who were now attempting to execute a plan that would cost innocent lives and damage international relations for years to come. They had silenced her once. They would not silence her again. Eliza checked the rearview mirror compulsively, watching for signs of pursuit as she made her way toward Manhattan. The morning commute was beginning, giving her some cover in the increasing traffic. She took a roundabout route, doubling back occasionally, and changing lanes frequently to shake any potential tail. As she drove, she mentally rehearsed what she would say to the Director of National Intelligence. The evidence was complex, the conspiracy almost too vast to be believable. She would need to be clear, concise, and utterly convincing, and she would have only one chance. The Washington Square apartment that served as their emergency rendezvous point was empty when she arrived. She waited for 30 tense minutes, hoping to see Daniel, Vanessa, or the others, but no one appeared. The implications were grim, but Eliza refused to dwell on them. She had a mission to complete, and time was running dangerously short. Using the secure phone Reed had included with the car keys, she dialed the emergency contact number they had established for reaching the DNI directly, a number that bypassed standard channels and should, in theory, be free from Hadley's surveillance. A cautious female voice answered on the third ring. "Verification code? Argus 749 Echo." Eliza responded, using the authentication sequence Daniel had made her memorize. A pause, then. Verified. Go ahead. I need to speak to the director immediately. I have evidence of an imminent threat to diplomatic facilities in Berlin, Tokyo, and Cairo, coordinated by elements within our own intelligence community. Another pause. Longer this time. Your location? Eliza hesitated, then provided the address of the Washington Square apartment. If this was a trap, she was already caught. If not, it was her only chance to get the evidence through. Remain in place. 15 minutes. The line went dead. Eliza pocketed the phone and moved to the window, positioning herself to observe the street below without being easily visible from outside. The next 15 minutes would determine not just her fate, but potentially the fate of countless others who would be affected by the planned attacks. Precisely 14 minutes later, a black SUV with government plates pulled up in front of the building. Two men in suits emerged, scanning the area with the practiced vigilance of security professionals. Behind them, a distinguished older woman stepped onto the sidewalk, Director of National Intelligence Eleanor Pierce. Eliza's breath caught. She had expected a representative, perhaps a trusted deputy, not the director herself. The fact that Pierce had come personally suggested either that the authentication code had carried more weight than Eliza realized, or that the director already had suspicions about internal corruption that made this meeting worth the risk. Steeling herself, Eliza moved to the apartment door, ready to meet the most powerful intelligence official in the country and deliver evidence that would shake the foundations of the agencies they both had served. The knock, when it came, was firm and confident. Eliza checked the peephole, confirming it was indeed Pierce and her security detail, then opened the door. Director Pierce, she acknowledged, keeping her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. The older woman studied her with penetrating gray eyes. Elizabeth Mercer, you've been off the grid for 5 years. I assumed you were done with our world. So did I. Eliza replied honestly, but sometimes the world isn't done with you. Pierce nodded, understanding in her expression. I'm told you have evidence of an imminent threat. Yes, ma'am, and of a conspiracy within our own ranks that makes the threat possible. The director's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in her eyes. A confirmation, perhaps, of suspicions long held. Show me. Eliza led her to the apartment's small dining table, where she had set up a laptop to display the contents of the flash drive. As Pierce's security detail maintained a respectful but vigilant distance, Eliza presented the evidence, the pattern of sabotaged operations, the financial trails of the Helix, the decoded communications revealing the planned attacks, and finally, the connection to Assistant Director Hadley and Phoenix Protocol. The attacks are scheduled to occur within hours, Eliza concluded, her voice urgent but controlled. And Phoenix Protocol is being used not to protect our intelligence assets, but to deliberately create blind spots that will allow these attacks to succeed. Pierce had remained silent throughout the presentation, her expression giving nothing away. Now she studied the decoded messages intently. This linguistic pattern analysis. This is your work? Yes, ma'am. I remember your reputation before Vienna. They said you could see patterns no one else could detect. Pierce's gaze was evaluative, measuring. The same skills that made you dangerous to certain interests. A chill ran through Eliza at the implication that the director might already have been aware of aspects of the conspiracy. Then you believe me? Let's say I find your evidence compelling enough to act upon. Pierce straightened, decision made. I need to make some calls. Secure calls. From my vehicle. She nodded to her security detail, who moved toward the door. Before following them, she turned back to Eliza. Your colleagues, the ones who helped compile this evidence, where are they now? The question sent a fresh wave of concern through Eliza. We were separated during extraction. They should have been here by now. Understanding and something like sympathy crossed Pierce's features. Wait here. I'll have my people look into it. At the door, she paused again. For what it's worth, Mercer, I never believed the official story about Vienna. Some things didn't add up, but I didn't have enough evidence to challenge the findings without endangering my own position. And now? Eliza asked. Now we have what we need. Pierce's expression hardened with determination. "And I intend to use it." Left alone in the apartment, Eliza felt the accumulated tension and exhaustion of the past 24 hours crashing down upon her. She had done it, delivered the evidence, convinced the director of its validity, set in motion the wheels that would stop the attacks and expose the conspiracy. But at what cost? Reed was wounded, possibly dead. Daniel, Vanessa, Michael, Julian, all missing, their fates unknown. People who had believed in her, who had reached out to her when she was lost in obscurity, who had given her the chance to reclaim her purpose and clear her name. She moved to the window again, watching as Director Pierce sat in her SUV, engaged in what appeared to be an intense phone conversation. Whatever happened next would be out of Eliza's hands. The machinery of government would take over. Operations would be launched to prevent the attacks. Investigations opened into Hadley and his co-conspirators, the vast network of the Helix exposed and dismantled. Justice would be served, but Eliza found herself wondering if it would feel like victory if her newfound colleagues had paid the ultimate price for their courage. A movement on the street below caught her attention, a familiar figure emerging from a taxi. Daniel, his left arm in a makeshift sling but very much alive. Behind him came Vanessa, supporting a limping Michael. Of Julian there was no sign, but 3 out of 4 was more than Eliza had dared hope for. Relief washed over her in a dizzying wave. They had made it. Not all of them, perhaps, but enough to know that their sacrifice had not been in vain. Enough to know that they had succeeded against overwhelming odds. Enough to know that sometimes the quietest person in the room, the one everyone underestimates, the one pushed to the sidelines and forgotten, can be the one who changes everything when given the chance to shine. As Daniel looked up and caught sight of her at the window, his tired face breaking into a smile of triumph and relief, Eliza realized that the stranger at table 12 had given her more than just 2 words that disrupted her quiet life. He had given her back herself. 6 months later, Eliza stood at the window of her new office, watching the late autumn rain trace patterns down the glass. From this vantage point on the 7th floor, she could see across the Potomac to the Washington Monument, its pale obelisk stark against the gray sky. The view still surprised her sometimes, a tangible reminder of how dramatically her life had changed since that rainy afternoon in Reverie Café. The aftermath of what the media had dubbed the Helix conspiracy had unfolded with the chaotic intensity of a summer storm. Director Pierce had moved with decisive precision once presented with Eliza's evidence, mobilizing trusted assets to prevent the planned attacks, while simultaneously launching a tightly controlled internal investigation into Hadley and his co-conspirators. All 3 attacks had been thwarted, the one in Cairo by mere minutes. The operatives captured during the prevention efforts had provided additional evidence that further unraveled the conspiracy. Within weeks, arrests had been made at every level of the intelligence community, from field agents to senior officials. Assistant Director Hadley himself had been taken into custody while attempting to flee the country. The financial network of the Helix had proven even more vast than they had initially suspected, with tentacles reaching into multinational corporations, banking institutions, and even charitable foundations. Unraveling it fully would take years, but the initial disruption had already prevented billions in illicit transactions and exposed dozens of shell companies. For Eliza and her colleagues, the victory had been bittersweet. Julian had not survived the warehouse raid. He had stayed behind to ensure the complete transmission of their evidence backup, sacrificing himself to buy time for the others to escape. Connor Reed had survived his wounds but faced months of grueling rehabilitation. And while Daniel, Vanessa, and Michael had all emerged relatively unscathed, they carried the weight of Julian's loss with them daily. As for Eliza herself, the aftermath had brought a kind of vindication she had never dared to hope for. The investigation had uncovered irrefutable evidence that her warnings about Vienna had been deliberately suppressed, her analysis proven correct in every detail. Her record had been officially cleared, her disgrace transformed into a story of principled courage in the face of corruption. Director Pierce had personally offered her a position on a newly formed oversight team, created specifically to prevent similar conspiracies from taking root within the intelligence community. The role leveraged her unique analytical abilities while granting her an unprecedented level of independence and authority. After 5 years of hiding in plain sight, of diminishing herself to avoid scrutiny, of settling for work that used only a fraction of her abilities, Elizabeth Mercer had reclaimed not just her name but her purpose. A knock at her office door pulled her from her reflections. Daniel entered, looking more rested than she had seen him in months. The shadows that had lingered under his eyes since Julian's death had finally begun to fade. "The D&I is ready for us," he announced. "Final briefing before the congressional testimony tomorrow." Eliza nodded, gathering the files from her desk. The classified testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee would mark the official conclusion of the initial phase of the Helix investigation. While the work of dismantling the financial network would continue for years, this represented a significant milestone, an acknowledgement that the immediate threat had been neutralized. "How are you feeling about it?" Daniel asked as they walked toward the elevator. "First time in the spotlight." "Nervous," Eliza admitted. "I've spent years avoiding attention, and now I'll be testifying before the most powerful people in government." "You'll be fine," he assured her, with a confidence that warmed her. "Just tell the truth. That's all they need to hear." The truth. Such a simple concept, yet one that had nearly been buried forever beneath layers of deception, corruption, and institutional arrogance. If not for the courage of a small group willing to risk everything, the truth about the Helix might never have come to light. Director Pierce was waiting for them in her private conference room, along with Vanessa and Michael. The room's windows offered the same view of the rain-drenched city, but Eliza barely noticed it now, focused instead on the task at hand. "Let's go through the sequence one more time." Pierce began without preamble. "The committee will want absolute clarity on how the conspiracy was uncovered and how the attacks were prevented." For the next hour, they refined their presentation, ensuring that the complex web of evidence and actions would be comprehensible to senators who lacked their specialized knowledge. Pierce was a demanding taskmaster, challenging every ambiguity, insisting on precision without sacrificing the human elements of the story. "Remember," she said as they concluded, "this testimony isn't just about securing convictions or funding for continued investigation. It's about restoring faith in the integrity of our institutions. The American people need to know that while corruption reached high places, it was ultimately exposed and defeated by people working within the system, people committed to the truth." Her gaze lingered on Eliza. People who refused to be silenced, even when it would have been easier to walk away. The implied acknowledgement sent a flush of pride through Eliza. Coming from Pierce, a woman legendary for her exacting standards and sparse praise, it felt like receiving a Medal of Honor. As they gathered their materials to leave, Pierce held Eliza back with a slight gesture. "A moment, Mercer." When the others had departed, Pierce indicated for Eliza to retake her seat. "There's something else we need to discuss before tomorrow." Eliza's analytical mind immediately began calculating possibilities. A new development in the case, an unforeseen complication, perhaps even a security concern about the testimony itself. "I've received an interesting request," Pierce continued, sliding a folder across the table. "From the British Intelligence Services. They've been following our investigation with considerable interest, particularly the linguistic aspects." Eliza opened the folder to find a formal request for consultation. Specifically, for her consultation on a matter involving encrypted communications that appeared to use a similar coding system to the one she had deciphered. "They're asking for me specifically?" she asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "By name," Pierce confirmed with the ghost of a smile. "It seems your reputation has crossed the Atlantic. They've identified a pattern they can't break and believe your unique abilities might be the key." The request represented something Eliza had never anticipated. Recognition of her skills not as a liability to be contained, but as an exceptional asset to be valued. After years of being scapegoated and silenced, she was being sought out for the very abilities that had once made her dangerous to corrupt interests. "It's your decision," Pierce added. "The consultation would be temporary, a matter of weeks at most, but I thought you should know that the option exists." "Thank you, Director," Eliza said, carefully returning the folder. "I'll consider it after we complete the testimony." Pierce nodded, apparently satisfied. "One more thing, Mercer. I've been meaning to ask, but never found the right moment. The initial contact, the man at the cafe who mentioned Phoenix Protocol within your hearing, We've never identified him. He wasn't part of Daniel's group, nor was he working for Hadley according to all the evidence we've uncovered. Eliza had wondered about this herself many times over the past months. You think he might have been working for another interested party? Someone else who had identified the conspiracy? Perhaps. Or perhaps something else entirely. Pierce's expression grew thoughtful. In this business, we become accustomed to looking for complex explanations, elaborate conspiracies, but sometimes the simplest answer is the correct one, which is that someone saw potential being wasted, talent being squandered, and decided to do something about it. Pierce rose, indicating the meeting was concluded. Whatever his motives, the result speaks for itself. He found the right person at the right moment, and everything changed because of it. The observations stayed with Eliza as she left the director's office, resonating with the truth she had been slowly coming to accept over these past months. The quiet, unremarkable life she had built as Eliza Morgan had been a refuge, but also a kind of surrender, acceptance of the unjust narrative others had created about her. When she had heard those two words, Phoenix Protocol, in the cafe that day, something dormant within her had awakened. Not just her analytical abilities or her trained instincts, but something more fundamental, her belief in her own worth, her conviction that she had something valuable to contribute to the world. That evening, after the briefing concluded, Eliza found herself drawn not to her new apartment in Arlington, but back to the operations center, where their makeshift team continued the painstaking work of unraveling the helix. The facility had been upgraded significantly since those early days. Gone were the hastily assembled workstations and borrowed equipment, replaced by state-of-the-art systems and proper security protocols. But the core team remained largely the same, bound by shared experience and purpose. She found Vanessa at her usual station, surrounded by financial records and corporate filings. The counterintelligence specialist looked up as Eliza approached, offering a tired smile. "Ready for tomorrow?" she asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," Eliza replied, settling into a chair beside her, "though I doubt I'll sleep much tonight. First time I testified before Congress, I was so nervous I forgot my own middle name when they swore me in," Vanessa admitted with a quiet laugh. "But once I started talking about the actual case, the nerves disappeared." "You'll be fine." Eliza appreciated the reassurance, though her mind was occupied with weightier matters than pre-testimony jitters. "Do you ever wonder about him?" she asked abruptly. "The man at the cafe? Who he was? Why he approached me specifically?" Vanessa considered the question, her expression thoughtful. "We've run every possible analysis. He wasn't on any of our watch lists, wasn't connected to any known network. He appeared and disappeared like a ghost." Director Pierce suggested that maybe he just recognized wasted potential and decided to do something about it. An intelligence community guardian angel? Vanessa's tone was skeptical, but not entirely dismissive. "Stranger things have happened in our world." "It just seems like such a risk to take," Eliza mused. Approaching someone who'd been out of the game for years, someone who might have refused to get involved, or might have reported the contact to authorities. "Maybe he knew you better than that," Vanessa suggested. "Maybe he saw what we all see now, someone who couldn't truly walk away from making a difference, no matter how hard she tried to convince herself otherwise." The observation struck close to a truth Eliza had been gradually acknowledging. Her years as a translator had provided security and anonymity, but never fulfillment. She had told herself she was content with her quiet existence, but in reality she had been hiding, not just from potential threats, but from her own capacity for exceptional work. "You know," Vanessa continued, "before all this happened, I had this image of you from the Vienna incident reports. This arrogant analyst who thought she knew better than everyone else, who couldn't accept that she'd missed something crucial." She shook her head ruefully. "Meeting you, working with you these past months, it's been a lesson in not accepting official narratives at face value." "For me too," Eliza admitted. "I spent 5 years believing I had somehow failed, that I deserved what happened. I accepted their version of events because it was easier than fighting a system that seemed determined to silence me. But when given another chance, you didn't hesitate," Vanessa pointed out. "You stepped right back into the fire, had she?" Eliza wasn't so sure her decision had been that immediate or that brave. She remembered the hours of doubt, The temptation to burn Daniel's envelope and return to her safe, unremarkable life. But ultimately, yes, she had chosen to act, to use her abilities despite the risk, to reclaim the purpose she had been denied. Their conversation was interrupted by Michael's arrival, his arms laden with fresh documents. "Sorry to intrude on Girl Talk, but we've got something interesting from the Swiss accounts. Looks like another shell company structure, similar to the one we dismantled in the Cayman Islands." Work beckoned, as it always did, the meticulous, detailed process of unraveling a financial conspiracy that stretched across continents and institutions. Eliza rose to join them, grateful once again for the chance to use her mind to its fullest capacity, to solve puzzles that mattered, to protect people who would never know her name. Later that night, as she finally returned to her apartment to prepare for the next day's testimony, Eliza found herself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a shadow of herself, living half a life, her remarkable abilities atrophying in the service of technical translations. Now she stood at the center of one of the most significant intelligence operations in decades, her name cleared, her skills recognized and valued, all because a stranger at table 12 had spoken 2 words that connected to her past. Or had it been that simple? As she prepared for bed, Eliza considered an alternative perspective. Perhaps the catalyst hadn't been the stranger at all, but something within herself, a resilience that had survived 5 years of exile, a core of strength that had remained intact despite efforts to break it, a deep-rooted belief in truth that had never truly been extinguished. The stranger had provided an opportunity, certainly, but she had been the one to seize it, to follow where it led, to reclaim what had been taken from her. The courage had been hers all along, dormant but not dead, waiting for the right moment to reassert itself. As she drifted toward sleep, Eliza's thoughts turned to the testimony ahead. Tomorrow she would tell her story, not just the technical details of how she had broken the code or traced the conspiracy, but the human journey from disgrace to vindication, from silence to powerful truth-telling. She would speak not just for herself but for Julian, who had given his life to expose the corruption, and for all those who had suffered because powerful people had placed greed above duty and self-interest above national security. Morning arrived with weak sunlight filtering through her blinds. Eliza rose early, approaching the day with the focused determination that had become her hallmark once more. She dressed carefully in a tailored charcoal suit that projected professionalism and confidence, a far cry from the oversized cardigans and faded hoodies of her Eliza Morgan days. Daniel met her at the steps of the Capitol, his own expression a mixture of tension and resolve. "Ready?" he asked, echoing Vanessa's question from the night before. "Ready," Eliza confirmed, and was surprised to realize it was true. The nervousness she had anticipated had been replaced by a calm certainty. She knew what she had to do, what she had to say. The truth was on her side, as it had been all along. The hearing room was imposing, high ceilings, dark wood paneling, the senators arrayed in a semicircle before them. Cameras recorded the proceedings for the official record, though much of what would be discussed today would never be released to the public due to national security concerns. Director Pierce was already seated at the witness table, her posture impeccable, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. She nodded slightly as Eliza and Daniel took their places beside her, a gesture of confidence and solidarity. As the chairman called the session to order and they were sworn in, Eliza felt a momentary surge of unreality. 5 years ago, she had been forced out of government service in disgrace, her warnings ignored, her career destroyed. Now she sat before the Senate Intelligence Committee as a key witness, her analysis the linchpin of a case that had exposed corruption at the highest levels. "Ms. Mercer," the chairman began, "I understand you were the first to recognize the coded messages that revealed the planned attacks. Could you walk us through how you made that discovery?" Eliza leaned toward the microphone, her voice steady and clear. "It began with a pattern recognition approach I developed during my earlier work with linguistic analysis. The key was understanding that the code wasn't embedded in specific words, but in the subtle variations of grammar and syntax across multiple communications." As she explained the technical aspects of her analysis, Eliza watched the senators' faces, noting which ones followed easily and which struggled with the complexities. She adjusted her explanation accordingly, finding simpler analogies where needed, providing more detail when appropriate. This, too, was a skill she had once excelled at, translating complex analytical concepts into terms others could grasp, building bridges between specialized knowledge and practical application. Like her pattern recognition abilities, it had lain dormant during her years of exile, but had reawakened fully when needed. The questioning continued for hours, moving from the technical details of the code breaking to the broader conspiracy, and finally to the Vienna incident that had precipitated her original disgrace. Throughout, Eliza maintained her composure, answering with precision and honesty, neither downplaying her contributions nor seeking to settle old scores. When it was over, when the chairman had thanked them for their testimony and the chamber began to empty, Director Pierce leaned over with a rare expression of approval. "Well done, Mercer. Couldn't have presented it better myself." Coming from Pierce, it was high praise indeed, but the greatest satisfaction came from knowing that the truth, her truth, was now part of the official record, irrefutable and permanent. Outside, the autumn afternoon had turned surprisingly bright, the earlier rain giving way to clear skies and gentle sunlight. Daniel suggested they walk for a while before returning to headquarters, a chance to decompress after the intensity of the testimony. As they strolled along the National Mall, the Washington Monument rising before them, Daniel broke their companionable silence. "Have you thought about what comes next? After we finish dismantling the helix?" Eliza considered the question. "I think you should do whatever uses your remarkable abilities to their fullest potential. The world needs more people who see patterns others miss, who have the courage to speak truth regardless of the consequences." His words echoed her own emerging conviction that her unique skills carried with them a kind of responsibility, that having reclaimed her voice, she was obligated to use it in service of truth and accountability. They had reached the Lincoln Memorial, its massive columns gleaming in the afternoon light. Eliza paused, looking up at the solemn figure of the seated president, his expression eternally thoughtful and resolute. "You know," she said, "during those 5 years, I convinced myself that I was happier in obscurity, that the quiet life I'd built was enough, that I didn't miss the pressure, the responsibility, the constant demands of the work we do. And now? Now I realize I was lying to myself. I missed it every day, not just using my abilities, but using them for something that matters, making a difference, even if only a handful of people ever know about it." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. Some people are called to extraordinary work. They can try to ignore that call, can build lives that look normal from the outside, but something essential will always be missing. "Until a stranger at table 12 says 2 words that change everything," Eliza added with a small smile. "The words wouldn't have meant anything to someone else," Daniel pointed out. "They mattered because of who you are, because of what you're capable of. The catalyst may have been external, but the response that came from within you." As they turned to head back toward headquarters, Eliza felt a sense of peace settling over her. Not the false tranquility of resignation that had characterized her years in exile, but the genuine serenity that comes from alignment with one's true purpose. She had lost 5 years to fear and self-doubt, to the crushing weight of a false narrative about her abilities and judgment. But those years had not been wasted entirely. They had taught her resilience, had developed her patience, had deepened her appreciation for the work she was uniquely qualified to do. And perhaps most importantly, they had prepared her for this moment, for the opportunity to reclaim not just her name and reputation, but her conviction that seeing truth and speaking it aloud were acts of profound courage, even when they came at personal cost. 6 months ago, a stranger at table 12 had said, "Phoenix Protocol," just loudly enough for her to hear. In doing so, he had set in motion a chain of events that had exposed corruption, prevented tragedy, and restored her faith in her own exceptional abilities. But the true transformation had not begun with those 2 words. It had begun the moment she decided to listen, to investigate, to engage once more with the world she had been forced to abandon. It had begun when she chose truth over safety, purpose over comfort, exceptional contribution over unremarkable existence. As they reached the security checkpoint at headquarters, Eliza glanced back at the Capitol dome, rising against the clear autumn sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more financial networks to unravel, more corrupt officials to expose, more coded messages to decipher. The work was far from over, but now, unlike 6 months ago, she faced these challenges not as Eliza Morgan, unremarkable translator, but as Elizabeth Mercer, extraordinary analyst. She faced them with full confidence in her abilities, with a network of colleagues who respected her skills, and with the unshakable conviction that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The stranger at table 12 had given her a key, but she had been the one to unlock the door, to step through it, to reclaim the life and purpose that had been taken from her. And in doing so, she had proven what she had perhaps always known deep down, that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the quiet one no one notices, until they change everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.